The altar call, the anxious bench, and new measures of the 19th century American landscape. I think we've all been influenced in the South of this revivalist methodology. It has incorporated itself into our liturgies. Baptist historian Michael Haken says that the altar call has kind of surpassed the supper in regards to many Southern Baptist liturgies as the climax of the liturgy. I've been reading through John Williamson Nevin, and he was a part of the Mercersburg theology, which kind of pushed back against the Princetonian theology, but the Princetonian theology in many ways won out as far as its influence in American evangelicalism. And both of these are within the Reformed camp. Mercersburg was more of kind of German Reformed. So I think he wrote this in, or maybe published it in 1844. So this is right when a lot of this stuff is happening. It's in the middle of 1844. Christ was supposed to come back for the Millerites. So he's writing this when a lot of this is kind of coming about, right? So you got the Charles Finney, Anxious Bench, Revivalism coming out, 1820s, 1830s. So Nevin himself is experiencing this even at some of the services that he attends. But this is kind of a summary of the first two chapters of his book called The Anxious Bench. This is a Facebook post that I made on my Facebook group of Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant dialogue, and I kind of just gave this summary of Nevin's view. So looking at new measures, 19th century methodology, and American evangelicalism. Within the Reformed world, you really have the two opposing views in the 19th century, Princeton versus Mercersburg. And though obviously the Princeton theologians would also speak against the new measures and revivalism, this comment on the altar call and the new measures system comes from the Mercersburg figure, John Nevins. John Williamson Nevin's critique argues that the new measures revival system of the 19th century America, above all the anxious bench, or what would come to be the altar call, fundamentally misunderstands the nature of true conversion. Rather than grounding salvation and justification by faith, these methods rely on psychological pressure, public display, emotional excitement, and mechanical techniques to produce decisions. The result is a shift from inward spirit-wrought faith to outward acts and intense feelings as the supposed proof of grace. Nevin warns that when such practices are treated as beyond criticism because they appear to save souls, the church abandons biblical discernment and opens itself to false excitement, masquerading as revival. Nevin insists that the anxious bench is not a neutral tool, but the clearest expression of a whole system with its own theology of religious action. And many would say that the methodology of the altar call came from Finney and his semi-Pelagianism theology, and many would even say just downright Pelagian. This understanding of kind of a hyper free will of the human, and we have to use these new measures in order to get them to emotionally come to Christ. Even in its most restrained form, it represents a method that encourages confusion between emotion and faith and turns conversion into something that can be produced by technique. He says if this practice is accepted as normal or necessary, the historic church itself will be altered in character, worship, reordered around excitement, ministry around results, and assurance around feelings rather than Christ. Attempts to denounce excesses while defending the anxious bench are therefore inconsistent. So attempts to denounce the excesses but while defending the anxious bench are therefore inconsistent because the bench itself is the gateway to the very disorders being lamented. And finally, Nevin dismantles the argument that the anxious bench must be legitimate because it works. History shows that apparent religious success proves nothing, since the same methods have produced conversions across wildly different and even heretical movements, from medieval ascetic spectacles to modern sects and fanatical groups. If a system can function equally well in truth and error, it cannot be evidence of divine power. True religion, Nevin concludes, cannot be judged by outward effects alone. Only what flows from inward spiritual reality has lasting value. For this reason, he calls the church to openly reject the anxious bench and the new measures system as a dangerous distortion of genuine revival and evangelical faith.